just in the last couple of days, South Australia changed its laws relating to protest. Now, in South Australia, you can be fined up to $50,000 or spend 3 months in jail for engaging in a disruptive protest. You could even be liable for the costs associated with policing that protest. This brings South Australia to become one of the states in our country with some of the harshest penalties for engaging in civil disobedience and protest, and possibly even around the world when we compare it to other similar Western nations. So South Australia, it's getting pretty draconian up there. Now, there are people that are saying that actually they welcome these type of laws because it targets particularly some of the crazy antics we've seen from climate activists. And when I say disruptive protests, if you look at the messaging from the government, the Labor government in South Australia, now this law was actually supported by both Labor and the Liberal opposition in South Australia. So they had bipartisan support when it comes to stamping out people's rights and freedoms. They're both for it. Labor or Liberal or whatever, doesn't matter. But what they say is that this targets specific actions by groups like Extinction Rebellion in Australia, or if you're watching from overseas, you might have seen Just Stop Oil in the UK doing some of their extreme antics like hanging off buildings, tying themselves to things, gluing themselves to public buildings, or standing in front of cars and disrupting traffic and all this type of thing. It aims to tackle those type of protests. And there are people who traditionally would be against government overreach who might look at this and go, well, if it's targeting those groups, this might be a good thing. And, as much as I don't like these climate activists and what they're up to in terms of the way that they do these protests, because I do find it disruptive actually to public life in some instances, as much as I don't agree with them on their particular issue, I think we're edging towards a slippery slope where we start siding with the government just because we don't like the particular cause that someone's protesting about, right? Because I saw this firsthand during the last couple of years where people would sit back while people were getting shot with rubber bullets or, getting their heads kicked in by the police during protests about lockdowns and mandates and, vaccines and all this kind of stuff in Melbourne in particular. We had people on the streets protesting, and there were these human rights groups. There were these groups who are complaining about these new changes to the law today, who were sitting back and saying, well, it's a public health emergency. The government has every right to stop protest. And, I learned through that entire process that actually protesting is very important, and it's something that we should get together as a community despite our differences and ensure that we protect it, is particularly from erosion via government rules and regulations that aim to diminish the rights of people in this regard. Now, with the climate protesters, I'll show you some examples from the UK, from Just Stop Oil. I'll show you one example of what happens with some of these styles of protest. Give me a second. Now, with that particular protest, you might be wondering what's happening with that guy that's jumped in there to push these protesters out of the way. So this group, Just Stop Oil, they do these slow walks where they walk on bridges and on main arteries and roads, and they just kind of walk slowly in front of the traffic. It's very disruptive. Police just kind of watch them do it. And here you've had a member of the public push these people out of the way, right? And he's being arrested by the police. So technically, some people would say this guy is actually doing the police's job and pushing these protesters out of the way to make it easier for the public to get on with their day-to-day lives, right? Sometimes it's important things that people have to do when they access the roads. So is it needed for the police to have more powers, for instance, in Australia, to push people out of the way or to stop them from engaging in this type of protest by having these heavy penalties, to stop members of the public being involved like this as well? So there's that argument to be made. Again, I see the sides of both the arguments for and against this, but I still err on the side of not fully getting behind the government on these type of actions, because today it'll be this, but they will use these same type of laws and rules to clamp down on issues that one day you might be in disagreement with. So that's the danger here, and that's the reason that even though I don't agree with these climate activists and what they're doing, I'm still wary of the government's reasoning and the government's intent behind these type of rules and laws. Now, I'm going to show you another video of a protest that's disruptive from overseas again. Not that there's not examples in Australia, but I just found this particular example overseas entertaining. Just give me a second. But that's again a disruptive protest in a private area, and there is some need there to have that policed or stop that type of thing from happening. And I don't know if the cameraman on purpose hit them or that was a planned camera movement. I'm not sure. I mean, it's funny in the sense that he got knocked out there for engaging in that type of thing. But yeah, it's a complex issue, and we're going to find that we agree or disagree based on what we look at in terms of, is it an issue that we agree with in terms of the protest, or is it an issue that we disagree with? And we might say that there needs to be more police action, which is, I think, what we saw during the mandates and the vaccine protests and stuff, where people who were, pro-vax or pro-government intervention were like, yeah, these people should be taken off the streets. And we're seeing the reverse now, where it's people who are against these crazy antics of these climate activists saying, well, yeah, they're disrupting us, they should be punished for it. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that we suffer as a whole, as a community, and these governments should not be trusted to look after our best interests. Now, there was an article from the Human Rights Law Center that kind of touched on this. So if you want to have a read about what this particular law does in South Australia, you can go to the Human Rights Law Center, and they kind of go over how this all came about. There are moves in place potentially to remove this particular, overturn this in the future. It could actually lead to some sort of high court challenge if these laws were ever to be applied, because it's not clear whether if some of this is actually even constitutional to restrict people in this manner. So it's a very complex topic, and it's one that we should always be aware of that's happening in our communities, because the government, I feel, these days is always looking for ways to divide people, right, along issues and introduce more laws, right, introduce more fines, introduce more ways for people to be deterred from questioning them in the public forum. Protest has always been disruptive, and I know that these climate activists are taking it to another level. Okay, generally disruptive protests aren't going there with the intention of disrupting everyday people and taking them offside. I understand that the climate activists, their whole intent is very clear, that they want to disrupt the public to show them like, oh, this is just a temporary disruption. Imagine what your lives will be like if we don't act on what Greta Thunberg says, right? That's their whole stick. And I get that, and it frustrates me to no end. But we have to find better ways to deal with this. And whether that's us as a community telling these climate activists, actually, we don't agree with you guys, and we will look at pushing for nuclear energy, and we send a message this way. I think these are the types of ways as a community that we can actually engage in the process, rather than siding with governments who are stripping away rights, which at the end of the day impact all of us. Now, I think I've repeated myself multiple times, but you get the point. Again, guys, if you're enjoying my content, you can follow me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Rumble, Twitter, and Odyssey at The Real Rukshan. See you next time.